Hello, thanks for joining us here on France 24 for Talking Europe. I'm Catherine Nicholson. Now, today we're looking to the northern edges of the European continent and a country with a long history of close relations with France. This with my guest, Angus Robertson, who is Scotland's State Secretary for External Affairs. Mr. Robertson, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
I'd just like to start, before we come to more Scottish news, with the war in Ukraine. Just this week, we had the Foreign Minister of the UK government in Westminster asked about Vladimir Putin's veiled threats regarding nuclear attacks. Now, Mr. Cleverly said it's important to listen carefully to what the Russian president has to say, but he also added that Mr. Putin has, in his words, a history of sabre rattling. What's your assessment?
I think that's a fair assessment. We're dealing with our neighbourhood bully in Vladimir Putin. This is somebody who's invaded a neighbouring country, setting off the biggest war in our continent since the Second World War. And he's losing, and he deserves to lose, and Ukraine must win. And the Scottish Government is in total agreement with the UK Government in standing up to our neighbourhood bully. And supporting Ukraine, providing them with the military means to defend themselves. And I think we do need to be both cautious about threats of escalation from Russia. Putin probably feels increasingly cornered. But at the same time, he's also continuing with his aggression in Ukraine. He can stop all of this. He just needs to withdraw, pay reparations, and those people who have been involved in war crimes need to face justice.
Let's move on to Scottish-French relations particularly. You're here in Paris this week to discuss issues including climate policy, culture, economic ties with France, of course. Now, it's no secret, I think, to us or to any of our viewers that relations between Paris and the United Kingdom's government in Westminster are really at quite a historic low after spats over Brexit, trade, migration, many issues. How much leeway do you and the Scottish Government have to carve out a different relationship between Edinburgh and Paris?
Well, the relationship between Scotland and France is old. In fact, it's the oldest alliance in the world. And I had the honour to unveil a plaque at Les Invalides, where France marks centuries of military conflict, and we unveiled a plaque to Scots who served and died in France fighting for France, myself and the French Veterans Minister, and it was a symbol of the fact that we are joined through centuries of history. The Scottish Government has a very different position to the UK Government on many issues, most notably of relevance to France and the rest of Europe on Europe. So the Scottish Government is pro-European because Scotland voted against Brexit. We want to get back into the European Union. So we take a very different position on that. But on many other issues, to be honest, because the Boris Johnson government and now the Liz Truss government are on the right of politics, and we're a moderate left-of-centre government, so we take quite a different position from UK ministers on a great many things.
And obviously the Scottish First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, she's made no secret she wants to hold another referendum on Scottish independence from the UK. She wants to do that in just over a year's time, ideally. Have you been seeking support from Emmanuel Macron's government?
No, we don't seek support from elsewhere. This is a decision for people to take in Scotland, and it's not appropriate for other countries to involve themselves in the internal affairs of other countries. So we're not asking for it, what we are asking for is just an understanding of what it is that we intend to do. And not only is Nicola Sturgeon in favour of having a referendum, the issue was decided in an election in Scotland last year, when this was the leading issue of the campaign. And we have a majority in the Scottish Parliament that we should have a referendum on Scotland becoming independent and rejoining the European Union. So we want friends in Europe to understand that we're in favour of a legal constitutional route to independence. And when it comes to that stage, we look forward to working with European nations, foremost amongst them France.
Just on that point you raised about the Scottish National Party getting a majority in the Scottish Government, as you said last year, that is indeed the case. However, that was a general election, campaigning on many issues. In fact, there was quite a small focus, I believe, in that election on independence itself. There was a lot of talk about COVID, economic recovery and other issues. I was in Scotland for that election. A lot of people said to me, oh, you know, we're a bit sick of the independence question. Is it really right to say that there's a majority in favour of independence? Given that background?
Yeah, well, you're pointing out the fact that there are two different issues, aren't there? There's should we be able to decide about our future, and then how might people vote on the issue? And you can have quite different views on both. I would hope that all Democrats agree that if people elect a government which has foremost amongst its pledges in its manifesto that there should be a choice about the future, that's what would happen. That's what happens in normal democratic countries. How people then decide to vote yes or no, that will be subject to the debate and the referendum that we're looking forward to having next October. Now, in the meantime, of course, we can have a UK government that can block a referendum in Scotland. But I think that would be challenging for the UK's international standing, because it would then confirm that the UK is not operating effectively as a fully normal democratic country. And I think people would look at the UK and think this is not fair play, and it's certainly not a normally functioning democracy. A referendum will come at some stage. We're planning for October next year. It is going to come. Amongst the youngest voters in Scotland, so between 16, 25, 35, support for independence is running at between 60 and 70%. So it's going to come sooner or later. Arguably, the UK government should agree to a referendum as soon as possible, because the longer they wait, the worse it's going to get for them.
Well, the First Minister has asked the UK Supreme Court judges to rule on whether Holyrood can hold a referendum without getting the say-so from the central UK government in Westminster, which, as you say, is currently refusing that backing. There's going to be a 2-day hearing on that next week. Some assert, though, that it is actually helpful for the independence cause to have Westminster continually say no and add grist to the mill of those in Scotland who say Westminster's holding Scotland back.
Well, I'd far rather just get on with having a referendum and us being able to decide on it, rather than, you know, making tactical considerations about what a more medium or long-term party political advantage or disadvantage might be. We've got very good reasons to have a referendum and to become an independent state, because we want to get back into the European Union, back into the single European market, back into the European mainstream. And we also want to be governed by the people that we vote for. I mean, I think people in France or elsewhere internationally, confronted with the fact that Scotland is governed by a party that we've never voted for since 1955.
In terms of the central government in Westminster.
Exactly. So we have a UK government in London that makes the big decisions about Scotland's economy, about our international relations and so on, that we don't support and we don't vote for. That's not normal. And we need to change that so we have the governments that we actually elect pursuing the priorities that the people are actually in favour of.
You mentioned Scotland being pro-European. We are, of course, 6 years on now from the UK's referendum to leave the EU, which was opposed by more than 60% of Scottish voters back in 2016. As you said, one of the big motivations for independence is this Scottish desire not to have left the EU. However, recent polling shows that only a minority of Scots actually identify as European, and there are economic arguments that Scotland would be in a very precarious situation, geographically blocked in a sense from most of the rest of the EU by the UK, a land border with England, its biggest trading partner.
Well, there's quite a lot in all of that.
If
I can unpick all of that. Well, firstly, on the 62%, absolutely right. 62% of us voted to remain in the European Union. And being in the world's biggest single market really matters to us. The issue of borders is one that, unfortunately, is a result of the Brexit vote. It is UK politicians that thought it was a tremendously good idea to cut ourselves off from the European continent. And it's not. It's been very bad for our trade. It's been very bad for our international relations. So we look forward to putting that right. And, you know, that at the end of the day, this is something that people should be able to decide on, and regardless of their identity, because to be honest, most of us have a hyphenated identity. Perfectly possible to be French and European, or Scottish and British and European, whichever way you want to slice it and dice it. It's at the end of the day, everybody has an individual choice about what the future of the country should be, and whether they are Scottish and British, Scottish, British, European, any combination of these things. People can retain their identity in different constitutional circumstances, but we live in a democracy, so it's the people who should be able to determine that, not people we haven't elected, especially the kind of people like Liz Truss in our government.
Well, Liz Truss government in Westminster says Brexit has already been a success for the United Kingdom. It cites things like, quote, taking back control of British fishing waters, of course, fishing a big industry in Scotland, making it harder for EU criminals to enter the UK. Would you agree with them on certain points that Brexit has had some advantages in Scotland?
No.
None at all?
I could go on. I mean, there's just no. I mean, let's take fishing, for example. So France is a very important exporting destination for the Scottish seafood industry. If you go to a restaurant in Paris, chances are the fish that you're eating comes from Scotland. Brexit has resulted in delays in transporting fish to market, and it's made it much more difficult for that to take place. So that's a disadvantage. The impact it's had on education, the impact that it's had on our cultural life, the impact that it's had on our labour market. I mean, I could go on. We don't have enough time in this interview for me to go through all of the negative consequences of Brexit. It is exactly as people warned. It is bad for Scotland. It's bad for the UK. Unfortunately, all of the UK political parties are now agreeing that they have to make Brexit work. Well, we don't agree with that. Brexit doesn't work. It's damaging and it undermines our economic situation, and it has undermined our link with the rest of Europe. And that's why we're not giving up, and our intention is to come back.
Angus Robertson, thank you very much for speaking to us on France 24.